but I hope it's okay and acceptable. I think I am kind of more interested in other people's poetry than my own. I'm quite squeamish, and I feel like going back to my own work is quite, challenging. And I guess I'm sure everyone has that, but probably with experience you kind of get over yourself. But I haven't quite got there yet. Actually, it's something I'm hoping to get perhaps out of. So I've really focused on other people's work, and I thought I might kind of go back to basics and do a bit of a close reading of something for everyone. And I think partly that's because my ideas about reading other people's poetry completely inform the way that I approach my own. So this is, I hope I have a visual aid, but I think maybe not everyone will see it. I don't know if I can stick it up somewhere.
Hold it up. Yeah. Just don't move it.
Oh, you'll hold it. Thank you, sorry. So it's a poem by Tom Raworth. As you can see, it's extremely short, because not much time. It's called Fits. It was written in 1984. Can I ask someone to read it out?
I'll hold it up some of the
It's only 8 words.
I'll read it.
Yay! Thank you. Can you see it?
Hole in the book, my tablet nestles in.
Thank you. Brilliant. So the first thing I would do approaching it is scan it, so work out where the stress is formed. And I guess this is something that maybe the composers might have a sense of. So whole is the first stress in the stress. Book is the second. And then my tablet nestles. And then the last stress falls on in. And as we all know, we shouldn't end sentences with prepositions. So Raworth is not only ending a poem with a preposition, but he's also forcing it to carry stress. And it's a tiny word, so it can't really handle the stress. So when you read it and you emphasise the in, but sometimes you kind of go, my tablet nestles in. It's difficult, it resists holding stress because it's too small.
I knew what you were going to say, you see.
So the poem seemingly is about a perfect fit. The title fits. The tablet nestles in this little hole. But the meter is incredibly important because the meter is resisting that fit. And it's going, no, this is disruptive. It's not fitting. There's something else happening here. So we have to look again then at what the poem's doing. If it's not about fits, what is it about? Well, actually, maybe it is about fits, but about a different kind of fits, about fitting like epileptic fits. And maybe that's where the tablet comes in. Maybe it's medication. So then we've got this tablet possibly doing very complicated medical things, preventing fits. But socially, fitting, epileptic fitting is kind of a very difficult thing to encounter. So the tablet's preventing the fits so that the person will fit in better. And then here's the in again, the in comes back. And being in fits, like laughing, social connection, but also laughing is a kind of violent thing that you can't control, so it's kind of disruptive as well as being social. So this tablet then is safeguarding a safe mental space for the person who takes the tablet and for the people around that person. But maybe because the tablet is nestling in this book, the book is also creating that space, that kind of safe space. And perhaps the poem is also nestling in a book, and perhaps the reader is fitting into the poem and nestling in the poem. So I think the poem is all about kind of the creation of a mode of being, or like a safe, immersive space. And that's something that I feel like I can access through poetry, but also music. I don't know if the kind of musical people here would connect with that. Yeah. Okay. You can probably put that down. Thank you very much. So, I mean, I think John mentioned earlier, as a poet, he was like, obviously I'm like really into words, but I think I obviously also I'm really into words, but I'm also really into space. I think space is really fundamental, and gaps and like falling through in order to understanding, well, language and everything. So there's this poet called John Wilkinson who I think is a great poet, but who also writes a lot about his own work in prose and writes about his process. And he has got an interesting conception of space and how it fits into poetry. And I'd just like to read a very little section. So he says, my intention was to generate a work that was beside the point and all around the point, which would never be spelt out and might resist identification. That's the point, resisting identification. The poems would be side effects, growing fetishistically impelled by what they look aside from. So you get this kind of idea of the poem as being some kind of container, the point of which is inside the container, but which is a gap. And perhaps that's a bit like the mental space that you enter in this like artistic, immersive space. And in that space, it's a way of somehow thinking, but not thinking in non-points, somehow thinking through things, but it's not completely cognitive. Yeah, I really like the idea of being beside the point, and I think that mental space is something that's like fundamental to my conception of music and poetry, and maybe that's a space that they can come together and work freely in collaboration there. But okay, so I'll go on to some of my own poetry. This is called Poetry, and it's kind of about the same thing that we've been talking about. It's about like space and inhabiting artistic space. Sorry, I'm just going to grab some. Okay, poetry. The softness cushions the fall. A space in which to land is there after a gentle drop. Always is nothing except in here. This is forever, where the blue sheet darkens under the mouth, and every muscle is softened. Almost, even the eyes, but not quite. No, the eyes, they are directed down. Everything is put right here. Often have I wondered, perhaps the world was imperfect for this. So I guess that's a kind of romanticization of that space. But there's also, I think, a sense of torpor in it. I think it is actually quite an ambivalent space. Okay. I'm just going to read one more poem, if that's all right. And I think it kind of thinks about similar things. It's called Found Poem, and it came after I lost something that was really precious to me, that I'd like, it was an object, but I'd given it a lot of sentimental, emotional meaning. And I lost it, and I was deeply upset. And then I found it again. And I didn't quite know how to assess my previous feelings about my loss, because then I found it, and it seems sort of pointless that I've been so upset. Yeah. Found poem. Finding a space on the beat to set up, setting up an on or an off, making faces to match the mark. To find is to have been found also. There's a comfort there and a gap, a space to recognise and consider. Here it is, now. And you've been imagining so much. Pacing and scanning makes you feel something that was always there, like likenesses or like somethings. Your words too can be found here as if anew. That is that which is no longer left out, on or off. Locating is no longer so uncomfortable, but to be located is also to find. Here, it would seem now it is. Has it changed you so very much? Like a likeness or a somewhere? And yet, here is that which is the gap that comes back and feels it won't slide back onto the on, easily, so easily, a little too vivid. My hand became so big that it found everything's in the torchlight.